And like, it just blows my mind a lot of times. And guess what? I'm still a friend with that person, and they're far above and beyond where I'm at now. But hey, like they become a long-term relationship. It's really interesting. Just literally happened to me the other day. So when you were saying that, I'm like, oh yeah, Luke is his name. Sold his company for 200 million. I was like, frick, man. Like this is a guy who was like slowly going. Hey guys, I wanted to jump in here really quick to give you a free gift for listening to the Lucky Titan podcast. This is going to be something that is truly going to revolutionize your business. Cannot wait for you to see it. Check this out.
Are you ready to share your message with the world? Introducing PitchDB, the all-in-one platform revolutionizing the way speakers connect with podcasts, conferences, and media outlets. With access to over 3 million platforms, finding your perfect speaking opportunity has never been easier. Our AI integrations create personalized bios and pitches, setting you apart from the crowd. Join the movement of speakers taking the world stage today. Join now at pitchdb.com.
Wasn't that awesome? I am so excited about PitchDB, and thank you, PitchDB, for giving us the free 1-month trial to anybody who's a listener of the Lucky Titan podcast. So guys, if you want to claim this, all you have to do is click the link somewhere here in the description or head to pantheon.fm/pitch. Once again, guys, that's pantheon.fm/pitch. Cannot wait to see you guys there. So now let's hop into the episode. All right, guys, we are back. Very excited to be here, guys, with Ryan Estes. Some of you might recognize his voice or his face from our previous episode we did together. When was it, Ryan? Like 2 years ago?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
It's 3 years ago. Yeah, your team reached out and they're like, hey, we'd love to come back on the show. I'm like, I should have invited you back on the show. We had an awesome interview. So I'm a little bit embarrassed by that, but I'm glad that we decided to hop back in because there's been a lot that's changed, even just in the last couple of years in the realm of podcasting. And I consider you one of the foremost guys in the podcasting sector. So I'm very excited to hear what you have to share with us today, because most of the people listening to this are podcasters and they have some sort of media channel themselves, and I think they'll really enjoy it. So first off, say what's up to everybody and we'll hop in.
Josh, I really appreciate you having me back on the show. I mean, of course, it's always great to get caught up with you, and even more fun to do it with microphones and recording it.
More fun in person. I mean, come on, man.
That's true. That's true. So usually we're like half exhausted from some conference when we run into each other. So
exactly.
Feel a little more spry.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, so man, tell me a little bit about what's been going on. Cause when we first interviewed you, you were doing Kitcaster.
Yeah.
I don't think you guys had launched Wildcast yet, had you?
No, I don't think we had. We might have been just validating Wildcast.
Probably right. Cause I remember you talking about working on some cool projects and stuff. I'm assuming that was Wildcast, or maybe his other business that failed epically. We've all done it, right? Many times. I have 2 right now that I'm considering scrapping completely. But tell me a little bit about what Wildcast is and what it's providing to podcasters.
You bet. Wildcast kind of derived from a need in podcasting. I've worked for years with Kitcaster with, tech, SaaS, business kind of podcasts. And what we found is that those are probably the most valuable audiences on planet Earth, are the people that listen to business and technology podcasts. And largely because they skew a little bit older, they skew a little bit more affluent, they skew a little bit more technically proficient, and they're coming to podcasts to find solutions. For brands that are providing those solutions, it's really a right market. And getting that right really means finding the perfect relevance between the host, the audience, and the brand. And that's exactly what Wildcast delivers. At face value, it's a advertising marketplace where kind of the ubiquitous tech brands and kind of hungry startups can find kindred podcasts and their audience in a way to provide opportunities for their solutions.
That's cool. Yeah, it's interesting to me because, and this is going to sound a little bit like I'm pushing on you a little bit, but I'm just genuinely curious because there's a lot of platforms out there, promoting, hey, listen to the podcast here or whatever. But what's interesting is the podcast market as a whole, listenership is growing over time, but number of podcasts isn't, right? Or number of active podcasts hasn't been growing, just from the data that we've seen. Do you feel like that's why you guys launched what you launched, simply because you felt like, hey, you could help support the growth of the industry? Or do you feel like the trends are pointing upwards enough to kind of pull you into that sector?
I think so. Absolutely. I'm bullish on podcasting, obviously. But also when we're looking at like podcast data, we know that some of that's going to be skewed from a couple of factors. One's just COVID. Like
Yeah,
during COVID, like
very good.
sports went down, Hollywood went down. The only like new form of entertainment was podcasting. So we saw a big surge there. And then if we're talking about new podcast ad, what was it? What was the click to podcast app? I forget what it was.
Yeah.
It escapes me, but there was a Anchor. Was that it? Anchor FM.
Anchor
So
FM or Clubhouse. I don't know. I'm trying to think which one you're talking of.
I think it might have been Anchor, where basically the barrier of entry for making a podcast was tiny. So you
Yeah.
had 1 million people start podcasts that was like, hey, what's up? I'm going to do a podcast, and that was it.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah, that's true. That's why I like looking at active numbers because like the number of
yeah,
active podcasts is always really intriguing to me because at least from what we've seen, it's sat close to around 400,000, like between 400 and 450,000 podcasts out there, which hopefully that provides hope for a lot of you listening to this because that's globally, right? That's actually
yeah,
not that many podcasts, all things considered. But what's weird is that number doesn't change, and it's like that the market's found that because like a lot of people start shows, but then they don't stick with them.
yeah.
But it's making incumbents like us like being able like if you just stick with it, you'll do better than everybody else because ultimately you're one of. I mean, if you literally just keep podcasting, you're in the top 10%. It's craziness to me.
I know, and honestly, like Wildcast is for those folks that like podcasting isn't an option. Like for
Right.
some of us, we're talkers, and without this medium, well, we'd lose our minds. So,
Kind of true. Kind of true.
so people that like turn podcasting into a part of their professional lives, is really kind of like our sweet spot. Because the value becomes, um, it compounds over time, kind of what you're speaking to, but it's also just innate, and again, it's, for people that live to communicate and like really need to reach out, particularly like interview type podcasts, it becomes kind of like, a third hand,
Yeah.
like you have to do it. So, Wildcast set out for these folks, particularly because they are in the interest of solving problems. There's a lot of solutions for B2C, type brands that, they can expand to comedy and they can expand to true crime and news and politics and all that kind of stuff. Which is great, but what we find with business and technology shows is you have a superior attention, or I don't know. I guess I don't want to qualify it as being better than anything else, but I think you get more
Very positive.
attuned.
Very positive. Yeah. Good attention.
You get more attuned attention, where people are listening to, a technical podcast about their career or something like that. They might be giving you 90% of their attention. Whereas if you're listening to true crime, you might get 10%, So I think
Yeah.
the quality of the attention is really important, particularly for brands that are accustomed to performance marketing, and
Yeah.
and podcast advertising, particularly the way that we deliver, which is host read, the value doesn't fit quite as neatly on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
There are some intangible, dare I say, magical aspects of having like a host read endorsement of your product. And oftentimes that could be just simply the novelty of like being on a podcast that you listen to, hearing your product on there is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, what's funny, and like for those of you who don't have a podcast, it's really not that expensive to get a podcaster to promote you. What's interesting too is that we've actually done this multiple times where we go and pay the host, and we don't even pay the host to we don't even have them do an ad. We just say, hey, talk about us. Right. And we'll generate a lot of business from that because podcasters know everybody. And like you said, the way that we as podcasters cope and get things off of our ADD brains is to podcast about it. And so they'll be yeah, this crazy company just paid me to talk about you guys, not even as a sponsorship, but just to talk about them. And they're awesome, right? We love this product. And it's so funny to me though that I think a lot of people don't look at it as an advertising medium, but like for small businesses, it's perfect. I mean, it's perfect. You're buying evangelists. It's such a cool model. And so
Yeah.
Wildcast is like facilitating that relationship. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we do. We kind of hunt out the podcast. We create kind of the wildcast, so to speak, for a brand. We deliver the creative, and then we report with air checks and beautiful charts to show the efficacy of the campaign itself.
Yeah.
So we make it very easy. The tough thing is too, oftentimes from brand side, is that every particular podcast has different sponsorship opportunities and the way that they package that. Some people will weave in newsletters, or they'll weave in a couple of Instagram posts, or weave in like display ads. And so we're really interested with the audio component. And so we can kind of whittle all that away and then do all kind of the front side work, which is, if you had a spreadsheet and you're advertising on 12 different podcasts, it's a lot to manage. So, our software basically takes that pain point completely away. So we're able to like deliver huge audiences that are very pinpoint targeted, from one kind of central dashboard, as opposed to like negotiating different terms with 12 different podcasts. We kind of simplify the process.
Mm, that's so awesome. Yeah, we were actually looking at Wildcast. When was it? 3 or 4 months ago. Because we have one of our clients is going to go out and do this big event, and he's like, "Hey, I need to fill seats." And I was like, "What better place to do that than just promote on podcasts?" So if you go on YouTube or like YouTube, Facebook, these sort of places, there's kind of like a generic cost to get butts and seats, but it's usually something to the tune of like $200 to get a paid ticket to an event.
Yeah.
Podcasting, it's way cheaper than that. I don't know what the actual number is. I'd love to actually have clear data on this, but we've seen that it's way easier to fill events like that just simply because the podcast host is talking about you and thinking about you, and they'll refer a bunch of people over to it. So it's like you're going to get a lot of butts and seats from just sheer having an evangelist on your side.
I totally agree. And oftentimes, like other kind of digital marketing channels get to be kind of cost prohibitive,
Yeah.
especially if you're in kind of sharky, bloody waters. You
Yeah.
know, I know that firsthand because if you're just Googling podcast advertising, then we're going to be competing with Spotify
Right.
and iHeart. So
Yeah.
the cost for those clicks is, you know,
Mhm.
exorbitant.
Yeah.
And what podcasting really represents is like, here's somebody who's voluntarily giving their attention, which is to say that like it's not algorithm based. Like somebody has to go to a podcast and subscribe, and then they open it up and it's chronologically, here's what's published this week, and you decide to listen to it. So, that kind of volunteering kind of system, again, just like makes the podcast audience so much more valuable because they're choosing to be there. And on top of that, they're choosing to listen to somebody they trust. So, I think the value just really compounds on itself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I want to put this out there for those listening because this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because I think it's a really Wildcast is an awesome tool. So is Kitcaster, right? I mean, you guys have really awesome companies, but
Thanks,
what I
Josh.
tell you guys, like you bet, but this is what I tell everybody listening is like, there's tools like this that are such low cost, easy, low hanging fruit ways for you to get out there further. I mean, take the opportunity to do it.
Mm,
I watch a lot of people like, oh, I have such a hard time getting in front of people. And you're like, if you pay, I don't even know what you guys charge, but like you pay these little bits of money and you're out there,
mhm.
just putting yourself out there, half the time you're going to generate more revenue, you're going to generate more listeners, everything that you're looking for, it's just on the other side of that
Yeah.
courageous action of putting yourself out there, and sometimes it's as low as $10 a month or something, right? So it's not very difficult to be able to get out there that way. But I want to ask you something here, Ryan. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want to ask you something with where you're seeing the podcast industry going, right? Because I've been talking to a lot of people about this, and everybody's like, they kind of treat it like how email is. Oh, email's dying, and right, well, it's not dying, and that just creates a new opportunity for everybody. But I'm curious, like where you see the market going, especially having so many shows in your repertoire, right? Like, what are you seeing as far as industry trends and movement?
Yeah. There's a lot of different directions. We're at this like crux right now, technologically speaking, this kind of like primitive area that a year from now we'll be like, wow, we didn't see that coming. So whether that's blockchain and what that can do for podcasting and audio, and of course generative AI, which is coming, for the every single industry, and like how is that going to affect it? Right now, you're seeing like as far as like the ubiquitousness of like podcast advertising, you're seeing kind of a shakeup a little bit. For the last couple of years, one of the big thing was like brand safety, and people were like, "Oh, what we want to advertise, but like, what are they talking about? And, and of course they're going to like true crime shows, or it's like,
Right.
well, you know, if you're worried
Talking
about
about the
brand,
worst thing possible. So, yes.
yeah, this content is like, yikes,
Yeah.
And so that's started to subsue. I think what was so interesting about podcasting from the very beginning is it has this like guerrilla radio feel, where
Yeah.
it's free and you can talk about anything you want, which is awesome. And I think as like large advertisers come in, they're going to start looking for brand assurances. And the podcast industry kind of shook that off. It's like, that's not what we're about. We're kind of about
Right.
doing our own thing.
We're a free
And
speech group. Just going to throw that out there, but
yeah.
I believe in that. She's very heavily in this community. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also like they could take a look and be like, we can listen to like horrible cases of mass murder and then like, oh, I do need some more AG1. I think I will order.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true.
So, that was kind of a trend. Now everyone's kind of looking with bated breath of what AI is going to do.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of, I've seen some cool toys, which is like, hey, what would it sound like a podcast with, Kurt Cobain and Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah.
so you listen to it, you could
Yeah.
train the model and see what happens. And that's cute.
Yeah.
And you're seeing like, Apple right now, the top, I don't know, 1,000 or something podcasts, they do free transcriptions. So they're obviously training, a model on all this podcast content. So, what we've known forever is that the data in podcasting is extremely valuable and
Right.
nobody really knows what it's going to do. Now, if I was to look into my crystal ball, I think podcasting might kind of become a beacon for authenticity, where
Mm.
I don't know how they're going to create a watermark of like, this is not AI,
Yeah.
this is human. And personally, I think AI is awesome, but I'm on team human. And what I've always been kind of charmed about podcasting is this like patina of amateurism where people are having real discussions. They're not, trained,
It's not professional shows. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. It feels natural and it feels welcoming and it feels like, um, it feels less lonely,
Yeah.
So I think podcasting is going to be a place where they're going to start using this kind of like, authenticity mark in some way to show that it's not AI, because AI is going to affect everything in such like a really cool way, in video games and movies and everything, music generation and all that. So we'll get to see, and I think if I'm to like look at what's the cutting edge of this right now, I think it's going to happen first in the music industry,
Mhm.
largely because podcasting is kind of this renegade lawlessness, that's always kind of been pushing the verge, whereas music is completely run by attorneys.
Yeah.
So they're going
Yeah.
to be quick to sue everybody.
Yeah. And yeah, music's a weird place. We actually we're working on a project called Band Royalty. It's one of my buddies started it, but it's to help with that problem because there's so many artists out there, especially in the music space, where people don't realize this, but artists only keep like 10% or less of what of the money that's made from their songs, right? It goes to the other 90% plus goes to Sony and these other big, behemoth companies. And but what's interesting is podcasting. I'm glad you brought this up. Is like with podcasting in general, is that I think people who consume it are consuming it because it feels like it's a personal conversation with the
Hmm.
host, or they're listening in on a phone call from the host, and like they're getting this opportunity to be a fly on the wall. And that's, I think that's one of the big reasons why people love it so much as a media. My curiosity, and this is why I want to ask you this, is that my curiosity is that everybody's running for these like million person shows. Like they're trying to get millions of downloads on their show.
Mhm.
And what's interesting, because like we've made tens of millions of dollars with my podcast, and I've taken I have a sponsor right now. I love them. The only reason I take on a sponsor isn't because I really care about the money. It's because I go, this is a tool everybody needs to use, and I get excited about that. But it's
Yeah.
very rare. Like I've had like 3 sponsors on my show total to this point. But what's interesting is that we've actually gone away from trying to grow the audience to millions and just focus on like, let's get a really good core group of people who are
Mhm.
actively listening and participating in the conversation that we start here on the podcast. And that's worked significantly better for us, but it doesn't really make us hyper sponsorable to the big wigs. And I'm trying not to go too far down this rabbit hole tangentially, but what I'll tell you is, I mean, we had Subway and Under Armour and Old Spice all asked to sponsor my show, and we were doing like we were doing around 1 million downloads at the time per month. And what we found was that, I told them our numbers, and they're like, "Oh, you're not big enough yet." And I was like, "I feel like a behemoth when I'm doing 1 million downloads. That's like nothing to these big players." They're like, "Well, when you're at 10 million, talk to us." I'm like, "Dang, that's craziness." So
Yeah.
like, knowing that, I'm just kind of curious with you is like, do you think there's going to be kind of a divergence of that, of like, instead of seeking millions of listeners, it's like just kind of niche audiences? Or, I mean, it's already kind of happening, but I'm kind of curious your take on that.
Yeah, we're kind of banking on that, honestly, because if you're working with like, Johnson and Johnson brands and things like this, then they have gigantic agencies with gigantic budgets that are probably scheduling out for 2025 and beyond right now.
Right.
So the benefit that they have is that they understand kind of what top of funnel type brand marketing is, and they see the desire and potential. What they're looking at is like, we don't want to have too many rows on this spreadsheet. So you get 10 million, okay, you get a spot. And we need to fill those out. So they're looking for gigantic audiences. So,
Yeah.
if you take a step down from that, and maybe even not that substantially, if you're looking at like Old Spice in comparison to, let's say, Slack, like that, or IBM, where they're technology companies, but like they're not necessarily like on commercials, television commercials. I've seen both Slack and IBM commercials. Maybe it's a bad example. But what you're finding is that like, it's going to leave a lot of podcasts out in the cold. If that's 1 million downloads, that's a gigantic show.
Yeah.
If you've got 250,000, that's a gigantic show,
Yeah.
So they're skipping over a lot of folks, particularly in these like kind of specialized niches, without realizing that like, boy, this is where the technical prowess is. This is where the value really is. But, is Subway selling a $5 footlong?
Yeah.
They're not selling an enterprise package that might, be a year-long sales cycle and a 6-figure close. So those type products now aren't going to like really respond to an audience that has 10 million people, because those people just have no interest or being there whatsoever.
Yeah.
So smaller niche podcast audiences are going to be ultimately the decision makers and the drivers of the sales of that product.
I agree. And I'm sure this is probably why Wildcast was born, right? So you can kind of bring bulk podcasts to these big players. But
Yeah.
somebody like me, like 'cause our mastermind, right? We charge our entry point's about 30 grand. So people, I could go run ads, I could do all these other things. But what I've found is that if I can find a show or somebody who has a really tight knit group or community that either pay them for access to their community, or they have, again, they're just evangelists of their podcast, but they like religiously listen to it. And I just get that person to be sold on me, and I pay them something. If I give them some money, like I'll close 5-10 deals off that person over a year. Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not life-changing money, but I mean, it's $300,000 in sales. And I paid the person, a couple grand a month, and they're stoked because they're like, "Oh, I only have 250 listeners." Right. And so like, I look at that though, and I go, I think too many people are playing this game of like, what do they call it? CPM, like the cost per thousand downloads or whatever. And I think that's kind of a joke, because it's like forcing some of these people to go out and do bot farming and stuff just to keep their shows alive. And I think that's a really stupid way to grow and to have a show,
There's a lot around that, and a lot of bot farming to keep, the numbers up so that they can impress the advertisers. And, it's kind of an unfortunate part about the industry in itself, is that it is on a CPM model. We experimented with a couple other models, but it ultimately like CPM is kind of the lay of the land. But that being said, we're in business to make sure that, people have the most precise, the most relevancy they possibly can get, which means that the CPM sometimes will absolutely skyrocket for certain shows, because if you're, a Purple Elephant podcast and someone comes along, wants to sell purple elephants, it's like, well, boy, if there's one person listening to that, this is a perfect fit. you
Yeah.
know? So we're really
Absolutely.
looking for those kind of relationships. And honestly, because it feels better, I don't have an existential problem with advertising, but all of us get annoyed by ads that have no, we're not going to buy, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. Well,
So, if you can
it's sort of
really,
like, oh, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, if you find that perfect fit, then it works for everybody. I mean,
Yeah.
podcasting still is the only time I pull over and take notes, is when something's mentioned on a podcast. I'm like, okay, hold on, rewind it back 30 seconds. What was that again?
Right.
So it works.
And this is what's interesting though, is like, and I don't know how you guys feel about this or not, but I actually don't really love being an advertisement anyways, because it's like I want them to talk about my brand in the
Yeah.
conversation, right? I mean, like, I've already brought up my sponsor, PitchDB, right? We've talked about him like 3 times here in this interview. And it's like, I tell everybody, head over there to go and get your pitches if you want to go speak on stage. It's a great way to get on podcasts. I get most of my guests from them now. Like,
Yeah.
it's so easy to naturally bring it up in conversation because I use it. And so that's where I run into problems even supporting like a Subway. Yeah, and not that I have anything against Subway. It's just that, I mean, throwing an ad on my show and they're listening in on a conversation between you and me, right? Where it just feels like there's a phone call between you and I, because it is, right? They're going to, they're not going to want me to say, let me interrupt this and give you an advertisement, right? That's why I'm kind of curious, like the way you guys are going about it, because it seemed like you're trying to go more organic approach and kind of more authentic versus just go by pitchdb/Pantheon or whatever it is, right? Nobody wants that. So
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's why we're host read exclusively. There's great tools on the podcaster side so that it's not like they have to bake it into the episode. They could put it in post, and they could put it in post for the entire breadth of their catalog, which
right.
is really cool. But yeah, I mean, like digitally inserted ads with Subway, it's just everybody hits skip, when you're listening to a show and then suddenly it's like, it sounds like radio. You're like, ugh, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I signed up for when I listened to this podcast. I could listen to the radio,
Yeah.
but and respect to everybody who does that. Ad supported is how a lot of us are making our living. But to me, I just don't listen to it because I realize that like this is how that podcaster is getting paid great, but like they're not giving that endorsement.
Yeah.
So if you can find like, someone talking about a product casually and like, hey, no, seriously, you got to check this out. Like people react. And I know that because I react.
Yeah.
And it's
Absolutely.
almost, that's how I find probably the majority of my tools.
See, and I actually don't know if you guys do this intentionally with Kitcaster, but most of the guests I get from you guys, because you guys are fantastic at placing guests on our show. Um, a lot of the guests that you guys bring onto our show will like come use my service. Like I don't even have to sell them or anything. They come in, they end up using us, they talk to us, and then they come on and they evangelize us like crazy. I don't know. Do you guys like train that into your people, or is that just maybe you're just getting
No,
lucky?
that's
Uh,
just, that's just a good product.
yeah. That's just
I mean,
interesting though. Like I recommend Kitcaster all the time because I think it's such an awesome place for people to be, obviously booked on shows or whatnot. But what's so interesting to me is that when when anyways, I'm pretty good at tracking patterns. When I see a lot of people who are coming from you guys and they're all saying the same thing, I'm like, you guys must have trained them on there. It's like they're so good at it, or they just evangelize us like crazy. That's such like being somebody who has a podcast that supports my business,
Yeah.
or whatever business I have at the time, right? And it's so helpful to me when my guest comes on and like takes the time to go, here's why Pantheon's amazing, right? Instead of
Yeah.
just like, here's why my book's so amazing and buy my book and blah, blah, blah. And it provides so much value to me. And the people who do that stand out so much that it allows me to then, I'm going to be raving about them because I go, wow, this person
Yeah.
actually took the time to see who I was instead of jumping on my show going, what's the name of your show again? You're like, come on. Like,
Well, it's also a testament to the quality of your products. I
yeah,
mean, when you're working with other business owners, it's kind of like, a couple of Ronins passing in the forest and bowing at each other. If you're like, dude, your onboarding was amazing.
right.
Or, that landing page is great, or whatever it is, for people that really take it to heart, like if they're a service provider or if they're selling products, like the extra touch of care that exists in like everything you do, I'm already taking notes of like that like, why is the lighting so soft on Josh's skin?
Makes me look tan. Makes me look tan.
But
Doesn't help
you
that
know,
I'm blending with the wall with my shirt right now, but that's okay. It's bugging me right now, but we'll get over it. I wear
it's,
black every day, but I didn't today.
it's kind of camouflage.
Yeah, I'm
But
like blending into my wooden wall. Anyways, go ahead.
no, but I think it's that, and so there's kind of like, game recognized game in a lot of this stuff. So
Yeah.
it's you, man. We don't do any coaching.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I love that. I mean, I just think it's so cool that you guys have been able to master that. So, dude, Ryan, a lot of good information today. So I want to ask you this. What, being somebody who's been so involved in podcasts and everything else, what's one thing you could tell a podcaster that they'll go do today that they'll get a massive win out of it?
For podcasters in particular,
Yes.
you know what? I found that like podcasters are oftentimes kind of the hub of their personal community. Professionally, that's probably very black and white. But probably friends and family. Here's something that I've been doing lately. Because I think we all kind of isolated a little bit through the pandemic, and then kind of the ultimate like result of what the pandemic became, which is just kind of like this air slowly coming out of a tire, is
Good.
it is like we kind of became a little bit more disconnected. So, for podcasters, really to put that on their shoulder, that like, if you're kind of person that's putting himself out there, that's having these conversations, chances are you're the same person in your little community. So what I would encourage somebody to do just for funsies is open up their text message app and just start scrolling and keep going and keep scrolling down. Basically, you're taking a time capsule back in time, and get, a year or two back and start finding the people that you haven't texted with in a year or two and shoot them a note. The note should always include a couple of things. Hey, I just hope you're doing great. And there's no reason to respond back. I was just thinking of you, and then add whatever personalization you want to. So yeah, you're not, making them feel any kind of way like they dropped the ball or whatever. You know how we all get.
Yeah.
But rather it's just something genuine and earnest. I think for podcasters in particular, because we are such communicators, that what comes back is just this whole wave of joy and enthusiasm. And ultimately, for podcasters, that's what drives us.
Yeah, that is cool. That is a really good point. What's funny is a lot of people forget that it's humans, right? We're not numbers, right? We're not a list. We're not all of us, right? We're all people. What's funny to me is I feel like that note is such a powerful note because there's zero ask. It's like, just
Yeah.
checking on you. Hope everything's going well. Nothing to pitch you, not even inviting you back on the show. Just hopefully proving that I care about you as a human, right?
Yeah.
What's interesting though, and I'm going to put this into like financial terms for those of you who are like, okay, yeah, but does that financially make sense? The answer is yes. We have found, no matter what size people are when they come on our show, whether they're brand new or multimillionaires or billionaires, 1 out of 20 of them is going to take off in the next year. And so every year, if I reach back around, I ask them how it's going, 1 out of 20 will be like, dude, we literally went from 0 to 50 million and just sold in 18 months or whatever. And I think it just blows my mind a lot of times. And guess what? I'm still a friend with that person and they're far above and beyond where I'm at now. But hey, like they become a long-term relationship. It's really interesting. Just literally happened to me the other day. So when you were saying that, I'm like, oh yeah, Luke is his name. Sold a company for 200 million. I was like, frick, man. Like this is a guy who was like kind of slowly going and all of a sudden just took off. It was amazing. But anyway, so I think that's such a great tip. So guys, I'm gonna throw one up note out here for you. Go check out Wildcast, really amazing platform. And then I am actually going to refer you guys over to Kitcaster. Now, my sponsor's not going to be super happy about this, just so you guys know. These guys are mildly competitors to PitchDB, except they have an agency for getting on podcasts, and they are really good at it. Like I said, like I pretty much accept anybody you guys send my way because I'm like, well, A, they're going to evangelize me, so that helps me a lot. But B, they just always provide immense value to our listeners. So I appreciate you guys. So again, you guys, I'll put links to both of those in the description here, but that's Kitcaster for getting on shows and Wildcast if you are looking to matchmake as either a business or a podcast. So Ryan, anything else you want to share with our audience today?
No, I just want to thank you for what you're doing. I love coming on your show, Josh, but like I've made a whole career out of podcasting from people just like you who are generous with their time and their audiences. And personally, like podcast hosts like you, I think the world of what you're doing, and I think it's a beautiful thing for at the risk of being corny.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And I think this is the world's greatest community. I tell people if you're ever feeling lonely in the entrepreneurial space, go hang out on podcasts or
Yeah.
just start your own. I mean, it's such a fun community. Everybody knows each other. They're all really kind to each other. Everybody's trying to help each other. It's a cool world. So, Ryan, thanks a ton for bringing your A game today. I had a lot of hard questions for you today, but they were genuine. I wanted to know what was going on. So I'm glad that you shared that with us. So once again, thanks, man. And we'll catch you later.
Thanks, Josh.